everybody, and welcome to the special extended free preview of this month's episode of What a Cartoon Movie, all about The Black Cauldron. I am one of your hosts, the munchings and crunchings enjoyer, Bob Mackey, who is here with me today.
Hey, it's Henry Gilbert, and I'm a bard, but my instrument is a microphone.
That's true, and all that throat meat you got there.
Yeah.
Pushing air out and making words. But yes, welcome to another extended preview of another episode of What a Cartoon Movie. Of course, we do these every month, and for our free listeners and folks on the $5 level on the Patreon, we put out an extended preview every month to let you know, get a little taste of the mega long podcast that is waiting for you behind the $10 paywall at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. So if you like what you hear now, you can hear the rest by signing up at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons, and you'll get the rest of this podcast and also the last, I will dare say, possibly 18 other What a Cartoon Movie podcasts we've done so far. Henry, what have we talked about in the past? Just a few of them.
Oh, man. Well, if you enjoy this talk about Disney history and this specific time in Disney even, you're definitely going to want to hear the ones we did for The Great Mouse Detective, Nightmare Before Christmas, Iron Giant, Toy Story 1 and 2. So much fun talk there and all those Disney classics. And also, Aladdin, that was a great one. And a Goofy movie. And those are just the Disney films we've done. We've done so many more, so many great films, often for over 4 hours. This one is in the about 3.5 hour range. And if you signed up now at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons for $10 a month, you would have, I believe now, at least over 80 hours. You might even be close to 90 hours of exclusive podcasts. And if you're a $5 and up patron too, if you go up now, you get access to that entire back catalog, and it'll just show up in your RSS feed or in the Patreon app as well when you sign in. It's an easy adjustment just to go up to that level if you're at $5. So, if you really enjoy this and you want to hear us go through scene by scene of how much we hate the character Gurgi, you got to sign up $10 a month at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons.
That's right. And if you're not a patron, it is so easy to sign up. And once you do sign up, you're also given access to our $5 stuff that includes all of our limited miniseries, interviews, end of season wrap-ups, and deleted scene specials for Talking Simpsons. There is so much content waiting for you if you've never been a patron, and you immediately have access to all of it. Everything we've done for the past 3+ years, you will get access to it immediately once you sign up at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. Thank you so much for listening to this little intro. We'll let you get to a free extended preview of this month's episode of What a Cartoon Movie, all about Disney's The Black Cauldron. So up front about The Black Cauldron, it was a massive flop with a budget once estimated at $25 million. That Waking Sleeping Beauty said $44 million.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I would bet that $25 million they say is just production and not advertising or any of that stuff. So I would bet 44 is more correct, and that's 44 in 1984 dollars.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very, very expensive. At one point, it was the most expensive animated movie ever made at that point in history. So in 1985, I forget what has eclipsed that since then, but Frozen 2.
Lion King is was already way more expensive than it. Yeah.
So according to the Slate article, I have a good quote. So this is how big of a flop it was. Quote, in its opening weekend, it only made $4 million at the box office. Good for fourth place, behind an E.T. re-release, the month-old Back to the Future, and at number 1, National Lampoon's European Vacation. Wow. Its final domestic gross was just over $21 million.
Man, oh man, killed. I mean, that E.T. re-release, it's another message of the propaganda that is Waking Sleeping Beauty, is that Steven Spielberg screws them over at every turn. They're like, well, then Steven Spielberg did this, and that includes this E.T. re-release, like shucking it down.
E.T. re-released like 3 years after the movie came out. That's crazy. Remember E.T.? Yeah, that was 1982. It's 1985. Back to the Future still beat The Black Cauldron, so I'm happy about that. I love Back to the Future.
It's one of our favorite. Hey, we did a whole Retronauts about it.
Yeah, please check it out. More of those will be coming in the future. So this was planned, and we'll get into this very soon, to be a huge prestige movie. One of the several reasons why it's so expensive is because they spent a ton of money on different production techniques, and one of them was making this a 70mm movie be the first movie Disney did that with since Sleeping Beauty, which was, I think at that point, their most expensive movie to date. Sleeping Beauty, yeah.
Okay. Now I got to pull up Sleeping Beauty on Disney Plus, because that is why this was so wide. Like on, not to brag, but I bought a new TV recently.
You had to like look across the room to see the entire image.
But it was weird to see it, like, because it's 70 millimeter, it's in real ass widescreen. Like, even on my HD television, I still have the letterbox stuff on top because it was so. I didn't realize it was 70 millimeter like that. That is a prestige format. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey is a 70 millimeter film. Like Lawrence of Arabia, like all these true prestige things. So yeah, they certainly had high hopes for this, and that is so much more expensive.
Yeah, it was their this is their 25th animated movie, so they wanted to go all out, and there's other reasons why too, but it was going to be like a huge prestige project. There is, I think this is the first surround sound, like 6-channel surround sound Disney movie, when that was not a common thing that theaters would have installed even.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing I read about the movie was they had worked on a holographic projection scene that was very impressive, for when the cauldron activates and brings the undead back to life, like something was going to pop out of it.
Okay.
But the thing is, you needed a special projector to display that sort of effect, and they couldn't afford to like send them to theaters, or they couldn't afford to roll this out like a roadshow like Fantasia would be, because Fantasia pioneered stereo sound in movies, but they would have to like bring the equipment to theaters, so it would like slowly creep across the country in the 40s.
That's right. Yeah. And I can now see the staging of the Black Cauldron's activation later in this movie. It does feel like there's a little something missing there. Well, same with like the undead army is like really weirdly like double projected or something. Like
there's something going on there.
Perhaps that's the remnants of what would have been there.
And okay, there was also an animator strike that set back production 3 months, so there's that too. And there's one other thing that it might come up later in the podcast. I can't remember right now, but I know there's one more thing that caused this thing to be so expensive. But yeah, hugely prestige project, and it's all based on this book series that no one has heard of because this movie destroyed its reputation and there's been no other adaptations of it. The Black Cauldron is based on a 5-book fantasy series called The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. It was this fantasy series published in the 60s, about a decade after Lord of the Rings was published, so I think it was hugely influenced by that.
I feel that all over that. Like,
there's a very Gollum style creature, right?
Gurgi and Gollum are pretty similar, and say like I did not read any of these books for this, but when I was watching it with my husband, I was like, this Gurgi seems kind of invented for the movie, and then he's like, no, he's in the book. Like, he's all these characters.
He's some weird sort of like ape man in the book. I'm glad he is less disgusting, although he's disgusting in different ways in this movie that offend me.
Those, the 60s were an interesting time for fantasy novels, like really making a comeback. It was when, the pot-smoking nerds, they got into The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings, and it opened up this whole new business world for it, like just to sell it to this whole new audience.
Yeah, I guess I would compare it to like, so Harry Potter came out and then there were a bunch of like Harry Potter style adventures like Aragon and Percy Jackson. And is Percy Jackson real? Did I make that up? Okay.
No, Percy Jackson, actually more Percy Jackson movies just went on Disney Plus this month.
God, where were they hiding them? So it was I don't want to undercut this guy's books because I'm sure they're good, but it was like a sort of like an echo of the Lord of the Rings phenomenon when it first exploded after they were published.
I get a sense of that phenomenon from reading the Kevin Murphy book about how he saw a movie every day, and when he talks about seeing Fellowship of the Ring, that he's talking about his dark pot-hazed days of being a Tolkien enthusiast. Like, those are the kind of 60s, 70s fans of fantasy that I think of.
My stepdad is one of those guys, and when my mom was dating him, we would go to where he was living, and like the walls were just lined with fantasy paperbacks.
Wow.
So that is the man who partially raised me.
That's a cool guy, man. No, I mean, even my dad, he never read books ever when I was a kid. But when I got The Hobbit, he's like, oh, I got into that in my time. Like, even my dad, who hates fantasy and fiction, he loved The Hobbit, and art and creativity. He really loved The Hobbit for some reason.
It was a phenomenon. So yeah, Disney options the series in 1971, so over a decade before the movie was made. And through this...
71, sorry.
That's okay.
That was when The Lord of the Rings that Bakshi did, right?
It was around that time, like early 70s.
Okay, it was in the air then, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sure that they wanted to, they probably had, hopes that it would be made in the 70s, pick up on that phenomenon. But 71 is when they optioned it. And throughout the decade, it was like the 9 old men are either going to retire or die. And this is going to be the next generation's Snow White. Like, they literally said that, like, this will be their first big movie to sort of like take the torch from the 9 old men and go off in their own direction. This like huge prestige project that's going to be like, this is the next generation of Disney. Get ready.
That's crazy. They saw it as the start of the next age of Disney, how Snow White started its age, and it would be the one. They were off by like 4 years. It would be The Little Mermaid that actually did that, but...
And one of the people who really wanted to make this movie was Don Bluth. And he is quoted on the record in some newspaper article saying, like, oh, this Black Cauldron thing is very exciting. We're all very happy to be part of it. So throughout the 70s, they kept thinking they would get to make it. But Ron Miller is like, so Ron Miller is the CEO of Disney at the time.
He's a real, like, hunky high school quarterback kind of guy.
He's charming and handsome, and he is also Walt Disney's son-in-law.
Yep.
So you got that going for you. But he was like, you guys aren't ready for this. I don't want to take big gambles yet, so you can do fluffy things again, like the Aristocats and Robin Hood and the Rescuers, things like that are not bad movies, but they're lesser movies compared to the prestige of Sleeping Beauty and Bambi and Pinocchio and all those.
I gotta think this movie's better if Don Bluth directed it. Like,
I think so.
As a youngster, I even associated this with like, yeah, this is a Don Bluth movie, right? Because there are some Bluthy ass touches to it. Like, and if you've seen, his animation for the Dragon's Lair games, you get the same kind of fantasy feel of what it would be, and like especially the pockmarked villains, like covered in warts and carbuncles.
I feel like they probably used a lot of his pre-production stuff because this movie is cobbled together from lots of pre-production throughout the years.
Yeah.
And when I was watching it, I was like, this is kind of like a Let's Play of Dragon's Lair in a way. So I have some contradictory sources on this, and one says that Bluth was still at Disney when the Black Cauldron officially entered production, and one that says Bluth's exodus in 79 caused Miller to greenlight the movie. But what's on the record, I think for sure, is that this movie was originally going to be released in 1980, but had this release changed to Christmas of 84 because of the Bluth exodus and because they needed to finish Fox and the Hound without 25% of their animators.
Yeah, they were kind of so screwed with Fox and the Hound that they had to, it was all hands on deck, and like miserable guys like Tim Burton and Brad Bird were killing themselves to finish that movie that also isn't that great.
Yeah.
It's better than this movie, I would say.
A lot of, I think every Disney movie is.
Yeah.
Maybe not Pocahontas. No, Pocahontas is better.
Yeah,
better songs.
I mean, Fox and the Hound at least makes you feel sad.
Yeah.
Like it can evoke feelings, and also I think its message at the end of the day is like, sometimes you can't solve racism, so people are still racist.
But yeah, so Fox and the Hound was Christmas of 80. That got pushed to July of 81. So like that's a big deal for Disney too. But you're right, Henry. It was basically all hands on deck. We finished Fox and the Hound and then do the Black Cauldron because it's implied that Disney got word of what Bluth was doing and they didn't want to be one-upped by Bluth with his more serious story. That's not confirmed, but I have to feel like they knew what direction he was going in.
I mean, today the animation field in America is so niche that everybody, well, not niche, but so closely knit, everybody knows what everybody's working on. When it's much smaller and all in like Burbank and Glendale, California, there's no way they don't know what Bluth is working on and that he has his own plans to make a film. But that also that is another key piece to why Black Cauldron ends up the way it is, because it is a reactive film. It's not being made because they want to make it. They're doing it because they want to will it into existence to be against somebody else.
It's now being made out of spite.
Yeah, spite film.
So Ron Miller promoted longtime Disney layout guy Joe Hale to head up this movie. He's the producer listed with Miller. This is after the Bluth exodus, by the way. So Hale rewrote the script that was like kind of being kicked around Disney to draw key moments out of 2 of the 5 books. The first book and the third book. So that might explain why the plot is kind of weird.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
In the Waking Sleeping Beauty, they have a scene of a guy in some presentation saying like, we took 5 books and squished it down to 1, but that almost doesn't explain how complicated this plot goes. It picking and choosing from 1 and 3 makes even a lot more sense on why the plot follows the arc that it does.
Yeah, and apparently the Horned King is like the ultimate evil of this world in the movie, but in the books, in the first book, he's a minor villain that is easily dispatched by the hero. So I think Hale picked him to be the villain. It's like, a villain with horns sounds pretty cool, so let's just do that. So
he's a cool villain, but maybe that too is why he's like at times one of the scariest Disney villains ever, and then at other times like Skeletor bumbling about.
Yeah, he's also Skeletor. You can't. I mean, I wonder how many kids were in the theater being very young and thinking like, when's He-Man going to show up to fight Skeletor? I really want to see this.
He-Man's he wouldn't take any of this guff from this guy.
And Miller also wanted a darker film along with the animators because teens were a demographic that they just couldn't reach because teens were like, Disney is kid shit. I don't want to do with kid shit. And Miller was very instrumental in broadening the Disney brand throughout the 80s. Things like the Disney Channel and Touchstone Pictures and Epcot. These are all ways for Disney to appeal to a more adult audience. And he was always about that, like broadening what Disney means to people. And this movie was a failed attempt to do that.
That's funny because the guy who comes after Miller, he was pretty obsessed with that too, but the official documents seem to say they want you to think it's the people after Ron Miller that were interested in aging up their demographics or appealing to non-children, but Miller was into that as well, it sounds like, which is, I mean, if you can sell stuff to children and adults, you make more money that way.
Yeah, I've read a lot of good accounts about Miller and how a lot of people liked him, and he's sort of like the loser of Disney according to the narrative now, even though he was like by all accounts a nice guy. But he did really cool things within the company. Like he is the person who personally funded Tim Burton's Vincent shorts because they're like, this kid does really cool work. None of it will ever fit in our movies, but let's just give him money and see what he does with it. So he was the guy that was doing that with Burton. So he got Burton's career off the ground basically independently.
I guess we also cover a bit of this era in that podcast too, Nightmare Before Christmas. Yeah.
So the development of the movie is very, very confusing because it was being developed for like 15 years. So I couldn't possibly give you every fact and you would not be able to retain all these facts. So basically it's a huge mess. Many different interpretations of the source material in terms of story and art are developed throughout the years. Lots of folks attached to the project would eventually leave or have their input unused. And it's important to note that a lot of this is still shrouded in secrecy. Like only people giving interviews like 20, 30 years later, that's when the truth is coming out about who did what, who was left behind, whose work wasn't used. Like there's no like official story on this.
Yeah, because Disney doesn't seem to care to share that. I guess maybe they see it as airing dirty laundry. Even in Waking Sleeping Beauty, like I was in my first viewing of it, I was like, that's all you're saying about I need a little more, guys. Like, yeah, and they and that doc proves they've got footage they could show. Like they clearly on VHS filmed a presentation of the storyboards through, like you can see behind the scenes, you can see a guy like acting out some Gurgi bullshit and behind him though is the end of the movie on storyboard. So I'm like, okay, this is the storyboard presentation. I want to watch this whole thing.
There's a lot of stuff that they can show us but won't, including lots of cut footage, which we'll get to later. But here are some fun things that happen along the way. So John Musker and Ron Clements, John and Ron go on to make, of course, Great Mouse Detective, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Treasure Planet, Hercules, big names at Disney.
Yeah, I mean, up to even like not Frozen, Moana too, yeah.
They were attached to the project as directors but left over creative differences. That's when they did the Great Mouse Detective. So they left. Remember, Great Mouse Detective was like an 18-month production or something crazy like that? Yeah. It's been a while since that podcast.
Yeah, because the stance was like, we got all, as Katzenberg says it in the doc, like we've got 175 animators are going to pay whether we make a movie or not, so just have them make this movie.
And they really wanted this movie to evoke Sleeping Beauty. Like the prestige movie is back for Disney. So they pull Milt Kahl out of retirement. He is one of the 9 old men.
Wow.
And he worked on Sleeping Beauty, so he designs a lot of the characters. It's why the boring princess, Alanwi or whatever the hell her name is, looks like Aurora. And she is not invited to the Princess Club. You never see her ever there.
Man, but she gets it even worse than the Irish one from Brave.
Oh, the Irish one. Merida? Is
Scottish, not Irish. Sorry, Merida.
What are you doing? Erasing Scottish history.
I'm sorry. My family, I'm Scottish on my mother's side.
I'm Irish on some side. Or just partially alcoholic. So Tim Burton worked on the movie. We all know that. that, right? His concept art wasn't used, but you can look at it online. Even though his work wasn't really used in the movie, Joe Hale, the producer, said he was instrumental in the darkness of the movie. Like, he was a big influence on that. So
yeah, I could. I mean, it has a dark tone that wouldn't be unwelcome in a Tim Burton thing, but I would imagine the Tim Burton version of this makes Torrin like a sadder sad boy. Like, he's too normal of a sad boy instead of being just Tim Burton inserting himself into the movie.
He needs a hook. He needs to be weird or quirky, not like this sexist animal abuser. I don't like him at all.
No, Torrin sucks. Well, and also, as we say all these names, it's like these names are just junk.
I mean,
they're forgettable.
I won't blame you for getting them wrong, but I think his name is Taran.
Taran, whatever.
And there's like Luma, the bard.
Oh, okay. I just think of him as the bard. That's it. Like, Gurgi is the most memorable name in the whole thing.
For the entire movie, I thought his name was Googie because they all have British accents. So like, Googie.
Well, and he shows up like, Gurgi. He says his own name a lot, but it's all garbled.
So the animators get to make this perfect movie on their own, like with no interference as far as I can tell. They get to make their dream project all by themselves. Of course, Ron Miller supervising as the producer with Joe Hale. So this is all going according to plan, right? Wrong. The movie's finished. In the fall of '84, months before the movie's release, Ron Miller is ousted by Eisner, Katzenberg, and Wells, who were seriously concerned that Disney spent so much time and money making a very non-Disney product.
Yeah, because if you're new guys showing up like Eisner and you see what is before you, this is not a Disney film to you. I mean, in general, we've seen this in so many creative things we've covered. When new executives come in, they don't give a crap about a thing the last executive thought was important. Like in Futurama and Family Guy, we talked about how Futurama got approved by the old bosses. When new bosses came in, they liked Family Guy more, and they went with that over it. And so, and Futurama was much more together than the Black Cauldron was. And so here you have these, Eisner and Katzenberg and Wells. They show up. To them, Disney is Snow White, it's Pinocchio, it's all these things. And then they see this like darker, violent, scarier thing. Like, and I get that too, that, it's the 70s were about all these other challenging animated movies that were like, we're not your Disney, not just Ralph Bakshi stuff, but like Heavy Metal and Fire and Ice. Oh, that is Ralph Bakshi. But,
mostly Ralph Bakshi.
Yeah, but there were some Bakshi imitators too. So everybody was trying to outdo Disney. So I can see why Disney's like, we can get a little bit of that edge too. We're seeing what's popular with the kids.
So when these new executives show up, they're like, come see our movie because you're obligated to. And so Katzenberg and Eisner are watching The Black Cauldron. They hate it. Katzenberg especially hates The Black Cauldron.
This is a movie made to enrage Jeffrey Katzenberg. Like, knowing his taste.
I mean, he's in that Waking Sleeping Beauty. He looks like the biggest like little rat fuck weasel in the world. Just like if you drew an executive, you draw Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Right? Yeah. Oh God. And all their mockery of him in the caricatures are so funny.
Yeah, very good.
My favorite is him in a cradle drawn as a baby, sucking on a Diet Coke with a mobile that's all dollar bills hanging in front of him.
Yeah, basically like telling the animators like, I don't want to make art, I want to make money.
Yeah,
like up front.
I mean, he's an asshole. He always has been an asshole. He's not wrong about everything, but it's also funny now that I think he'll be buried as the Quibi Man. Like that'll be his last thing.
We failed Jeffrey Katzenberg by not downloading Quibi and watching all those great shows. I think I might have a Quibi show. I'm not aware of it.
It's worth a shot. There was a brand new Quibi article that came out the day we're recording this that's really great. Our friend of the show, Scott Gardner, is one of their first comments on it because he describes going into this amazing like office downtown in this like huge lobby that then opens into another lobby, and he's like, I'm surrounded by expensive seeming candy everywhere.
I mean, Quibi was already a bad idea. By the way, Quibi means quick bites. It was at this point, and probably still is if you're listening to this, an app you download, and the shows are all very, very, very short. You can only watch them on your phone. Again, it was already a bad idea, but then a pandemic happened. We have nothing but time to watch stuff now. Like, we're not waiting in line for things anymore. We're not like, at the bus stop anymore. We're all in our homes for the most part.
And the funniest shit is seeing Jeffrey Katzenberg who chooses. He doesn't have to do any interviews, but he is choosing to do interviews where people are like, well, this is stupid, though. And he's like, no, it's not. You're comparing apples to submarines. That's what he constantly says. You're comparing apples to submarines.
I think that's very funny. Yeah. But again, he's too rich to think he's ever wrong, just like J.K. Rowling. We're learning that more and more. Not to bring us down.
But so, yeah, 35-ish years ago, you've got the Jeffrey Katzenberg who's like, he's younger, he's not as crazy as Entitled, but he is still kind of a dick from all of the reports in that, not just Waking Sleeping Beauty, but also in that too.
So yeah, he hates the movie more than Eisner, and he demands that 10 minutes be cut from the movie, and they're like, well, you don't cut animation once it's finished. That's not how it works. He thinks like, oh, we'll just cut parts out and then we'll just put in unused footage to sort of edit around. And they're like, no, we don't animate things that aren't used. Everything is done, like everything is planned from the beginning, so we're not doing extra work. And he doesn't understand that. He thinks you're just like pointing a camera at things and they're moving around.
He doesn't. Yeah, I mean, that is one of the most frustrating things I heard in that movie, because we've been through that at jobs. Probably lots of people have been through that at jobs where you know how to do something, you've learned it as part of your profession, then you get a new boss that's showing up who has never done anything in your profession before, and they go like, well, why don't you just do this? And when you explain, well, here's why it doesn't work, they're like, I don't want to hear no's, okay?
Exactly.
Like, and it's so infuriating.
That's why I'm very happy to be self-employed. But
I mean, that's the process of making a movie. You board it out and you make all the choices about what you're going to do before you start actually, even doing the pencil test, so you don't waste time and money.
Yeah, like literally every frame is accounted for. Yeah. And if there is a scene that's cut, it's usually not finished, and it is just a scene. It is not like, I don't know, this character can't walk over there anymore. It's like, here's an entire scene that we cut out.
Yeah. Well, and same on The Simpsons. I forget which producer they said that I think it was Brooks, that they said like Brooks was like, well, let's just film coverage for animation, like to give us choices.
Oh God.
And the animator's like, what? Coverage in animation?
I want to see someone crazy enough to do that. So the Katzenberg story goes, he wants 10 minutes cut out. They don't want to do it. He just like runs off with the film and tries to do it himself. And I believe Eisner intervened. Katzenberg sucks. He's awful, but to his credit, he did take steps to learn about how animation works, and Eisner did as well. Yeah. Like Eisner, you watch the interviews with him in '84, and he's just like, well, I'm used to the script. I'm used to reading scripts. I'm not used to all these boards. I'm just kind of like trying to pay attention. I forget what's happening. So these guys are like in way over their heads when it comes to animation.
I love that story of them saying they had to like sit for 3 hours having storyboards explained to them, and then when it's over, they're like, do you get any of that? No, me neither. Nah, like they're just lost with the idea of storyboards, which now, live action films are so CG anyway that like you got to sell, you're boarding them out anyway. I would think the Bob Iger knew how to look at storyboards pretty early in his career there.
I think so by that point. And Eisner, to his credit, I like Eisner more than Katzenberg. Mm-hmm. He entered Disney as they were about to launch their biggest animated flop, but he still believed that animation was the future of the company, but it just had to be on his terms, like faster and cheaper and annually if possible.
I would totally believe if I was one of those animators there, especially because they talk through how they had to move out of the old animation building and be in a shitty place in Glendale. I would have been certain that these new corporate raiders come in and they're just going to shut down this and only re-release the old stuff. Why would they make new stuff, especially when they don't understand it? Like, I got to give credit to Eisner for sticking with it. Like a more penny pinching business leader would have just said like, no, why are we making new things? Especially when we let you make a new thing and you made this unsellable movie.
And ultimately, between 12 to 15 minutes of fully finished animation were cut from this movie.
That's wild.
Fully scored with music and fully colored and finished. Just like the movie was done when Eisner and Katzenberg sat down to watch it. Like they entered in the fall of '84. It was going to be a Christmas of '84 movie. It just, all that was left was to do all the marketing and stuff. Like the movie was just ready to go.
Wow, that 12 minutes, I didn't realize 12 minutes is
millions
so
of dollars,
and
right?
Yes, millions and millions. Like that. to cut that much, I mean, that has to be why so many times this movie feels like, wait, what happened? Like there's just like a big just jump from a thing to another thing pretty instantly.
Yeah, there's like a very abrupt edit in the movie where like even the music is interrupted, and that's just it was victim to that sort of edit. And I couldn't find, I don't know if it's on Disney Plus as an extra, but apparently according to some review, like there was 8 minutes of footage that was a DVD extra. I don't know how finished it was, but it involves like the fairy folk. So these fairy folk characters are pointless. I have to say, like, where the Smurfs weren't big when this movie started production, but were they inspired by the Smurfs? I don't know, but they're such a nothing part of this movie, and we meet them so late. But they're apparently like a lot of the deleted stuff is this fairy folk stuff or the fair folk.
I mean, they suck. So I'm glad
they're awful.
Like that is what I would cut. Even Jeffrey Katzenberg was right that like a lot of this was messy, but especially I read the fairy folk is just they're the toys to sell. They're like, we need more cute things in this. Like, okay, all the cute here. There's one that's even a little baby fairy. Isn't that cute?
I hate that guy or lady, whatever it is. I forget. I have to watch the movie again. And it slipped out of my mind. But yeah, Gurgi wasn't enough for you.
Yeah,
I don't think they made fairy toys, or I don't know.
I mean, no toys happen.
Yeah,
like there's
only later like Disney Store stuff. They made a toy of Gurgi, the pig, and the main boy, the main fairy.
Okay, yeah,
the lead boy.
I mean, I think the Black Cauldron, whenever it gets merch now, it's like part of whenever they do their version of Funkos or whatever, like they do one thing for everything. So you're like, well, you'll get a Darkwing version of this and you'll get a Black Cauldron because they just want to cover everything. So, and even with their failures, Disney will merchandise it to some degree.
Yeah. Whenever I go back to Disneyland, I hope it's soon. I will now I know what these characters look like. I would have never guessed they were from a Disney movie if you just showed me them.
Oh yeah.
But like, what is this from Once Upon a Forest? I don't know.
It totally looks like one of those wannabe. It looks like a wannabe Disney film, 100%.
So the movie, it slips its Christmas of '84 release date. It's pushed to July of '85 in order to give the team time to do rewrites, to reanimate things, and re-edit certain scenes. So lots of things were cut, almost entirely for violence. So the Cauldron scene is supposed to be this big fucking deal the entire movie's based around because it's called the Black Cauldron, but there's so little of that in the movie. So this Cauldron-born sequence when the undead warriors all come to life and these goons suddenly realize they're working for a skeleton, a lot of that is cut out, mostly the undead warriors killing people. So there's like a decapitation, a guy's like torso gets cut out in half.
Wow, man.
All this violence, like this guy gets covered like in boils and his like skin falls off. Like all this graphic 80s PG violence is happening on the screen.
Well, you know, by 85, the PG-13 is sneaking up on them. It's approaching, like, you know, Poltergeist came out too. Like there's pushing on what PG can be, and maybe they thought they could live in the deep chasm that existed when they were producing it between PG and R. They're like, well, what is R rated? You know,
has anyone tried to cut a animated head off and see what that gets rated?
Decapitation in a Disney movie, that didn't happen until Avengers Endgame.
Oh, that's right. Spoilers, everybody. So other things that were cut were Taron killing guards with this magic sword that he gets in the movie.
That really feels like when he gets away from those guards in the movie, I kept thinking, like, is it all just going to be happenstance? It really feels like this sword should kill people. But
does he even use the sword for like battle? Or like
he uses it to like when they're going up the stairs together, he kind of throws that guy backwards with it.
Yeah, he uses the sword to push people, I think.
Yeah, it's all kind of like Errol Flynn way of non-lethally using a sword, which I can get to that later. When they see the film, they're like, the lead character in a Disney movie doesn't kill people even in self-defense. Like even in all of the movies, the big bad has to die by their own hand, not because they're killed even in self-defense by the lead character.
And that's another thing that was cut out. There was going to be a battle between Taron and the Horned King before he gets sucked into the cauldron. Spoilers. This guy goes out like a chump. He's just
It
like,
sucks.
oh, I got too close to the cauldron. Oh, no. Bye. Goodbye. I'm out of here.
I know the way. Okay, that makes so much sense. They need to have an actual confrontation, these two characters. All he does is he like shoves him off with his feet, and then the Horned King is like, whoop, whoop, whoa. God, it sucked. When he's so good and scary for so much of the movie.
He like pratfalls into his early demise.
And all that because they didn't want to have a direct like sword fight or whatever with Taran and the Horned King.
And I think a lot of these cuts were inspired by a test screening in Burbank before the movie came out, probably in '84, where like parents and children were leaving during these violent scenes, and they probably would have. I mean, if they left these in, we would have been hearing like, "Oh, that was nightmare fuel for like Gen X or whatever." Whoever was watching this movie.
Yeah, that's true. It would probably hold a similar space to what The Last Unicorn has for a lot of people, because for our generation, parents would rent you VHSs of like, well, this looks like for kids, it's a cartoon, and they didn't understand the levels of intensity that animated things can be, and they're not all G-rated films. Like The Last Unicorn, I know for many of my friends, they're like, oh, I was scarred by that. That's scary. That vulture with like boobs on it really terrified them. And the giant like fire breathing beast, like all that stuff stuck with them. And even more so for parents to take kids like, well, yeah, it's the new Disney film. Obviously my 4-year-old can see that. And then they see a character like chopped up by a skeleton.
That's what Eisner was afraid of. And in a way he was right, but in a way it's sad that they couldn't challenge, because now you're seeing stories like Sony is like, why not make animated movies for adults? And the ones that we've had so far suck. Like, it's okay if you like it, but Sausage Party, it's like, can't we make a movie for adults, not just like the food come fuck kill movie? Like, it's stupid. You can tell other stories outside of like making it vulgar on purpose. Be like, this ain't for kids.
I know, right? Well, that's the only two ways you can do it, or at least that seems to be the only ways that executives want to engage with it. We'll see now if
I think Spider-Verse is getting close to a not adult movie, but not strictly a kids movie.
Yeah, Spider-Verse got closer. It's much more of a like young adult to teen movie with stuff for mommy and daddy that can enjoy too, and not like in the way Shrek was.
Yeah.
But you hear those stories now of like, well, what do we greenlight in a COVID world where everybody's remote? Like, maybe they will just make more R-rated CGI films at the very least.
To wrap up this little history section, we're going to go and talk about like the talent behind the movies. So Black Cauldron, my take on it, it's like a gorgeous mess. Like, it's still fun to look at, and it features like all of the Disney talent that would go on to do amazing things throughout the 90s and beyond, and the 80s too. So like super talented animators and story people are working on this movie, but they just couldn't make it work. And this was not because of executive meddling. I feel like they made a bad movie. It probably still would have been bad if the Eisner and Katzenberg didn't intervene. I can't see it being much better,
No.
pre-Eisner and Katzenberg.
Yeah. I think Eisner and Katzenberg, especially like when we did the Gargoyles one, I remember reading about how Greg Weisman said that Eisner had a strong hand in everything, and he was always about like, how do you tell the story, the beats, all that stuff, so involved in it. So I would think if this started under the Eisner regime, honestly, it probably wouldn't have got past storyboard. But if it had, I think he would have at least directed it a lot more, like as in set down them on a better path to being a good movie in the Disney style.
There are so many story problems. Like, the main character is just awful. Like, he's either bland or annoying. Gurgi, we'll get to Gurgi, but Gurgi, I want him executed. I want him arrested and put down.
Another thing I think it's cursed with is the thought that was held by films until I think the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, which is, don't plan on a multiple film series.
Yeah.
If you buy a trilogy of books, you got to just shove together what you can and make it one movie, and you just focus on that one movie. And that kind of curses us too. I think if they had decided like, let's just take the first book and make that into a movie and just focus it more.
Yeah.
But, you don't make, I think the thought then too is you don't make sequels to Disney movies. So if you're going to tell a full story with all these predating characters, you just got to shove it all into one.
And still to date, no release of the original cut of the movie, which I think they could do it by now. I mean, it exists somewhere. It might not be in the best condition, but that movie was shown. It was completed, fully scored, fully animated. It was shown to Katzenberg and Eisner, and has not ever surfaced. And I feel like
that Burbank screening, those people got to see it too.
We need to track them down.
Yeah, you know how Disney like monetizes so many things and sells, all this stuff to the longtime fans. I think maybe a different company, like say Warner Brothers, they Snyder cut all this stuff, or they sell you the kids of the 70s grew up dreaming of, when am I going to get to see the real Richard Donner version of Superman 2, which never existed, but they faked it as best they could eventually with a DVD in 2007. And Warner goes to that well more than Disney does. Like, I think Disney, maybe they just want a definitive version of something, even their least popular animated film,
So one person who really liked it was Roger Ebert, bless his soul.
Oh, yes, I did watch
Roger
this.
Ebert.
Yeah.
I don't have a clip of the review, but I did read his review because the great thing about Roger Ebert is all of his stuff he's ever written is online.
Right,
and it's real easy to find. So I'm not going to quote the entire review. It's a 3.5 out of 4-star review. So he also gave that to The Phantom Menace. His tastes differ on lots of things compared to mine. He says, quote, by the end of The Black Cauldron, I was remembering with something of a shock of nostalgia the strength and utter storytelling conviction of the early Disney animators. The Black Cauldron is a return to the tradition. So Ebert saw this as like, Disney's back, baby. Look at this.
I mean, in '84, maybe he's like starving for good animation. In the At the Movies section I watched of it, he's similarly glowing about it. And he seems to really be into just like, he loves seeing a fantasy story. He hadn't seen a sword and sorcery story in a long time in a movie. And also, like, he was gushing about the special effects, which I guess probably did look good then, But it's funny. Siskel doesn't give a crap. He's like, I don't care. This isn't as good as Snow White. And they have also a very funny exchange in the beginning where Ebert's like, growing up, I always loved the Disney films and still love watching them. And Siskel goes like, oh, I bet you identify with Dumbo, right?
God. Classic japery.
And then Ebert said, you remind me of the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh, man. I gotta look this up. But yeah, Ebert was the bigger cartoon nerd of the two.
Yeah, which I like that he gave cartoons respect, even if sometimes he gave reviews that I wouldn't have given. But that's why we're different people.
Roger Ebert told me to watch anime in 1993, and I listened, and that's why I like anime.
It's true, yeah. And he was also right. One of the last parts of his life was telling people that the Transformers movies are dog shit, and people are like, how dare you? It's Transformers.
I honestly appreciate him saying video games aren't art, because I agree with him. Take that, gamers. I'm allowed to say that because I was a games journalist for 10 years.